Welcome to the presentation of our Project One country, Brazil. The project team preparing this presentation consists of Sarah Wu, Craig Fairhurst, and myself, Paul Bersuelis. We're thrilled to present to you the key information you need to make sound business decisions. This information will cover the cultural, social, political, economic, regulatory, and investment environment of Brazil. We will then propose to you our 3 product recommendations to introduce to the Brazilian consumer market. The Hofstede Cultural Dimensions Analysis Tool is a cross-dimensional statistical survey of cultural biases and worldviews in various situations. It is broken down into 6 cultural dimensions that generally govern interpersonal, business, and political interactions. The power distance score shows that Brazil has higher attitudes towards power being centralized, with little hope or even desire by the population at large to share in or participate in issues of power. This factor, combined with a relatively low individualism score, suggests that power is concentrated in the higher echelons of society, with little movement up or down. Brazil, we also see from the dimension rankings that it is more feminine in its culture, meaning that individuals are less individual and more group-centric. And they have their identities and behaviors constantly measured against the good of the group rather than what is best for them individually. This cultural propensity to drop everything when a family member or a close friend and associate needs help is also reflected in their relatively high indulgence score. The individual is expected to help out whenever needed, and the group is expected to cover for the individual when they do. Now let's look at the global business culture. Explicit versus implicit communication is an examination of how direct or clear and accurate communication is, and whether or not a high amount of context is needed to understand the true meaning of a message. The US is a low context culture. People are very precise and literal and direct in their words. Brazil, on the other hand, are somewhere in between low and high context. They place a stronger emphasis on how a message is said rather than the words being used. Because of these differences, it's important to establish personal relationships when conducting business in Brazil. Evaluation. Brazilians tend to be more indirect with their negative feedback. This may have something to do with their more implicit communication style. How do they address disagreements? Well, they're non-confrontational. They like to avoid open conflicts. They may be more open to be more direct if there's a relationship already established, and you can get at the true meaning of the words in that case. Finally, the scheduling. Brazilians are polychronic work style, or have a polychronic work style. They have multiple assignments and goals happening at the same time, and so their view of time is more flexible. You have to keep that in mind when working with people in Brazil. Now that we have some ideas of the cultural characteristics of Brazil, let's examine some of the bargaining strategies that could be applied there. Because Brazil is group-centric with high perceptions of power distance, your counterparts at the negotiation table will want to have a very clear idea of how your offerings and products can affect and benefit them as a group and not as an individual. The higher up in power an executive you're negotiating with is, the more they will be thinking about the larger group, his organization as a whole. A high-level executive will be thinking this because that's in their head, that they're the head of the organization and that his people will be looking up to him to be looking out for them. So be prepared to help your counterpart to understand the group benefits and be prepared with concessions that benefit Brazil, more job stops, or maybe even in-country part sourcing. It's important to understand the government structure and leadership in Brazil. It's much like the United States. Brazil is a democratic federal republic, with a president serving a 4-year term as both head of state and head of government. The framework for the government of Brazil is laid out in the federal constitution, which serves as the supreme law of the land. Brazil does have a democratically elected national congress, a bicameral legislature, which is composed of the federal senate, which serves as the upper house, and the Chamber of Deputies, much like the United States House of Representatives, the lower house. The Senate is made up of 3 representatives who serve 8-year terms from each of the 26 states in Brazil and the federal district. The Chamber of Deputies represents the people of each state, and its members are elected to 4-year terms. The current president of Brazil, elected on October 28, 2018, is Jair Bolsonaro. The Bolsonaro administration is generally pro-business and has been working to limit federal regulations. The Index of Economic Freedom is an annual index and ranking created in 1995 by the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal to measure the degree of economic freedom in the world's nations. It is an index that measures jurisdictions against each other in terms of 12 factors. Brazil's economic freedom score is 53.7, making it the 144th freest in the 2020 index. Brazil is ranked 25th among 32 countries in the Americas region, and its overall score remains well below the regional and world averages. Overall, Brazil's score on the 12 factors are around the world average. Brazil's scores on fiscal health, however, are well below the world average. Brazil's fiscal challenges stem from the government's inability to keep expenditures lower than revenue. This is partially due to a problematic pension system. In Brazil, pension expenditures consume a disproportionately large portion of the budget, which then reduces the government's capacity to invest in infrastructure, education, health, and other areas which are needed in funding. Of course, it's important to have an understanding of the regulatory environment in Brazil if you're going to put in place a business plan that's going to be profitable. One of the concerns in Brazil is that the companies are finding it takes over 1,500 man-hours a year to prepare taxes. You add to that the cost of taxes themselves, the total tax and contribution rate of 65%, and it gets pretty expensive. Fortunately, there are some things that counterbalance that. It is easier to enforce contracts in Brazil. If you have to go to court, you'll find that the percentage of claim value that you retain is a respectable 24% in Rio de Janeiro and 20.7% in Sao Paulo. And that's pretty respectable when compared to the rest of Latin America. It's important to consider the trade agreements that Brazil is under. Brazil is a member of the World Trade Organization. Being a WTO member means that they are under the most favored nation status and under the World Trade Organization agreements. And these provide rules and regulations for all its members to trade safely and equally. And according to the WTO, most favored nation status means treating all the WTO members equally. It is better to do business with companies in which the countries are WTO and MERCOSUR members, since Brazil is a member of both. Brazil can also enjoy lower tariff barriers and protection by agreements within WTO and Mercosur. Before doing businesses with companies in which the countries are non-WTO members or Mercosur members, the company should do some research and have well-established agreements and contracts that protect the company from any disputes. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, is the investment in an open market economy by a foreign-owned entity, usually a corporation. In Brazil, FDI is welcomed with many incentives directed towards foreign companies. Brazil receives the most FDI of any South American country and is the 5th in the world in total FDI received. Currently, there are no restrictions on the amount of investment or equity a foreign company can contribute, either directly or indirectly, but there are registration requirements and laws governing the FDI in Brazil. All FDI is overseen by the central bank. Often the investee, or the Brazilian company receiving the investment, will help with registration and all required paperwork. Such registration requirements are not necessary if the equities or ownership was purchased through the Brazilian financial markets. A particular note is Brazil's move to privatize the vast majority of its economy, and specifically to provide foreign investor protections. Brazil now treats foreign capital with the same weight and responsibility as it does the Brazilian real, which is its currency. In court cases down to the municipal level are reflecting this adjunction and protection. Brazil participates in all major international treaties on arbitration as well. Now, one of the exciting developments of Brazil is the positive direction of many of its economic measures and purchase power indicators. Back in 2015 and 2016, gross domestic product was in negative territory, but it has been growing about 1.3% a year ever since. The gross national income per capita, a measure used to gauge the income of most residents, has been growing for 3 straight years, reaching new heights in 2019 at $14,800 annually. And then perhaps this graph shows, most importantly, is that inflation is becoming under control. For years, it was very high in 2015 and 2016 at 9%, 8.7%, but as you can see, it's really tapered down at a pretty healthy level. And hopefully that will continue to grow and gain some strength in the Brazilian real. Inflation leads us to currency value. Now, the real has been on decline for more than a decade. Its peak trade value versus the dollar was in 2008, right before the mortgage financial crisis hit, and the dollar dragged everything down in the global recession. Here shown is a monthly chart of the real versus the dollar. And as we can see, the value of the real has just continued to decrease, and for over a decade, and there's been kind of no end in sight. Now, hopefully, with the inflation, coming under control, maybe in the future this will reverse itself. But for now, it does show a persistent and consistent purchase power parity undervaluation of the real, and also indicating that materials could be purchased for cheaper in country than to import them, presuming they are available. This might be an opportunity for someone looking for horizontal partners for further foreign direct investment. It could explain the high levels of FDI in Brazil is receiving. Now we're excited to look at our product proposals. The first one, the electric vehicle. This market is underserved in Brazil. Currently, the electric vehicle market is still developing and expected to continue to grow in the near future. According to the research on markets, about 15,000 electric vehicle units are expected to be commercialized by 2025. The Brazilian government also just approved a plan to prohibit the sale of petroleum and diesel-powered cars in 2030. The Brazilian government is supporting the growth of the electric vehicle market to address environmental and energy issues. Any company looking to sell the electric vehicles there also may consider targeting the government market and private companies, as it shows in the city of Costa. The Brazilian government, quote, consider choosing to expand the electric car and government and private companies' fleets in which electric vehicles can become economically beneficial and operationally attractive. Now, our second product proposal, energy drinks. The demographics in Brazil favor this product. Men between the ages of 18 to 34 are the most likely to consume energy drinks. And Brazil is a nation of younger people, where 62% are age 29 or younger, and the median age is 31 years old. Now, the Brazilian energy market is also forecasted to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 4.1% between now, 2020, and the 2025. The Brazilian beverage market also faces increases in non-alcoholic beverage consumption as alcoholic beverage consumption decreases. Likewise, rising incomes and improvements in living standards have led to busier, active lifestyles, which in turn increase the appeal of energy drinks. This is a key growth market in the future. Finally, we propose a line of deodorants, antiperspirants, and body sprays that would incorporate local, regional, and national scents and smells that are reflective in Brazil. One of the key potentials of this product is that the national average for Brazilian deodorant use is only at 69%. When compared to the US at 99%, we see that the market still has a large way to go and there's room to grow. Also, all the major brands in Brazil are from large multinational corporations. There's room for a domestic player, one that would specialize in a stable of scents, flavors, and other sensory stimulants that would uniquely define it as a culture and nation. A deodorant that would appeal to the senses of Brazilians. Now, we've reached the end of our presentation. We were thrilled to present this key information to you on Brazil and its business environment and business potential. We hope that you've been educated and empowered to go forward and make sound business decisions. Thank you again for watching.